The reality is most people go on podcasts and make absolutely no money as a result of their appearances. And what inevitably happens is when I talk to people, they hit me with the good old,
podcasts just don't work for me.
Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how one of my clients, Patrick, made over 6 figures from the podcast that we specifically got him booked on. But more importantly, I'm going to explain the process that we used on the back end that was able to convert the attention he got from these podcasts into dollars. So if you're new here, all we talk about on this channel is not only how to get booked on podcasts, but more importantly, how to take the attention and exposure that you're getting from these shows and turn them into new clients. And we've worked with over 300 business owners in a variety of service-based businesses and shown them exactly how to do that. So here's the thing. I hear it every day on the sales call.
Devin, I don't get leads. Devin, I don't even know if they worked for me. I don't know what happened. I have no way to track. Devin, I didn't get it. It doesn't work for me.
And people freak out and tell me, Devin, podcasts don't work for me. All right, now that I got that out of the way, let me tell you a little bit about Patrick before I tell you some of the results he got and more importantly, how we helped him do it. When Patrick came to us, he was running a multi-million-dollar business called Stacking Capital. What they do is simple. They get business owners access to funding so that they can ultimately scale their businesses. Great company. He had 2 other business partners that were working with him. And long story short, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail because this is his story to tell, not mine. What ended up happening was his business owners essentially formed a coup. They took all of his marketing assets, sales assets, everything. And they left the company and started their own thing, ultimately leaving Patrick with literally starting from zero. And quite frankly, I didn't even know this until about 5 months after he began working with us. He kept going on podcasts. I didn't know any of this until he sent me a voice note via text. And in that voice note, he went on to say that all of the podcasts were producing incredible amounts of momentum. It was the difference between him getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 extra clients. But more importantly, he started telling me the things that really got to me. He said, Devin, people show up to the calls. They already trust me. They view me as the particular solution to their particular problem. And he was saying how now people are starting to look at him as an authority and it's tremendously helping him, his sales process. And then what he said was, Devin, the thing that really is incredible now is how it's affecting our paid advertising process. And I got to thinking, I was like, what made Patrick so darn successful? And what I realized was that it ultimately came down to 5 things that we did with him and ultimately things that he acted on, because here's the thing. I could teach you the system. I could tell you what to do. I can get you on perfectly aligned podcasts, but if you don't listen, it don't matter. So let's dig into it. And ultimately my goal with demonstrating this to you is not to do some corny case study interview that convinces you to work with me, because if you do, cool. If you don't, cool too. My goal is to help you replicate his results. Once again, not saying you're going to do so, but at least share with you the system that we use to help him get these results. So maybe you could take 1 or 2 things away that will help you along your journey. Step 1 in the process was understanding that the entirety of our operation was on the foundation of one thing, making sure that we got Patrick in front of the right people. Now, when I say right people, I specifically mean 2 things. Number 1, getting him in front of people that already are interested, not in what he does, because let's be real, how many people are interested in raising capital or getting access to credit? Sure, there might be a select few, but ultimately getting him in front of people that already were interested in the end desire that he helped business owners accomplish, which was not getting access to funding. And this is where companies really screw it up, because they have a very short-sighted view of what it means to get somebody on a podcast. They'll think, oh, I'm only going to get them on a credit-based podcast, but they're not focusing on what is the end result that Patrick ultimately helps people achieve, which is helping them scale their business. Because the more access to capital that you have, as Patrick's company is called, the more capital that you can stack, the faster you are able to scale your business. So what we first had to understand was, okay, based upon Patrick's ideal client, what are the podcasts that are going to specifically get him in front of people that have the desired end result that he helps his clients achieve? And then number 2, so what we didn't do was get him on a bunch of random entrepreneurship and business podcasts like most folks would do because they're lazy and they don't really understand marketing at a high level. Instead, what we did was we looked at our network of thousands of podcasts and we identified the podcasts that were going to get him in front of people that were more sophisticated business owners who understood how getting access to capital at 0%, which he does, could be a tool that they could leverage to scale their business faster. Because the reality is, if we got him in front of a bunch of of people that were looking to make their first 5 or 10K in a month, they're not going to be able to understand or conceptualize or see the vision of how getting access to capital at that level that he helps them get access to is going to help them scale their business that much faster. So that's step one in the process, is making sure we were getting him in front of sophisticated business owners that understood, number one, what the access to capital could do, but number two, were serious about scaling their business. And that leads directly into the second point, was we needed to make sure that the audience we were getting him in front of were likely to have the financial capability and willingness to pay him for his services. Because that's the thing. If we're getting you on podcasts, but the audience is likely to not have the money, it's not going to do anything for you. So what that means is we need to pair alignment of the audience with also financial capability and willingness of the audience. And the way we do that is very simple. We study the audience demographics, psychographics, income levels. We look at the topics of the podcast, past guests. We really go so in depth to the point where we can say with as much certainty as possible that these people are likely to be that type of sophisticated business owner that has the access to capital to pay you for your offer. So now at the end of step one, we're able to identify these are the perfect podcasts that Patrick has to go on if he wants to get clients specifically for his business. And this is where most people miss the boat, is they don't do this. They just get on a bunch of random business podcasts and hope it works out, rather than thinking and reverse engineering in terms of where the people that have the end desire that Patrick helps them achieve, where are they spending their time? And let's leverage the podcast host audience to get in front of those people, because when we do, the trust that has been developed with that podcast host, with their audience, is ultimately going to be transferred onto us. So now what ends up happening is when you go on the podcast, and this is going to lead into the second part, but when you go on the podcast and you're able to articulate your message in a way that resonates with the person and helps them understand how you're going to help them bridge the gap between where they are and where they want to go, you become the obvious solution to their problem. So the first part of the process, just to put a cap on it, was we got him on the right podcast that specifically got him in front of his ideal client by doing an extreme amount of due diligence on the podcast we were getting him on. Step two in the process was we walked him through a process that we call maximizing audience retention. And what I mean by that specifically is this, and I remember in the message that he sent me, he said, "Devin, people show up to calls and view me as the particular solution to their particular problem." And what that tells me is that this audience has an incredible amount of trust with Patrick. But the reason why Patrick was able to develop so much trust with them was because he got them to spend so much time with him on the podcast. In other words, Patrick was able to leverage certain psychological principles and components that we helped him implement on these podcasts that retained the audience's attention. And this is where most people go wrong, is they don't know the best practices, not to just get somebody to click on the podcast and watch it, but more importantly, to get them to stay until the very end. Because how we spell trust is T-I-M-E. The more time we get people to spend with us on that podcast, the more trust they are going to have. And the more trust they have with us, the more likely they are to convert. So that's why maximizing retention maximizes conversion. So what we did was we worked with him all the way from how do you introduce yourself on a podcast, leveraging a specific method that we teach our clients, which if you want to learn more about, you can click on the description down below, all the way to how do you answer a specific question in a way that draws contrast between everybody else in your market and you, to all the way to how do you craft an urgency-based offer and frame it and deliver it in a way that specifically positions you as the person that they absolutely need to get the offer from. So what ends up happening is now you're getting people to stay from start to finish, which is ultimately going to help you convert at a higher level because there's trust that's built. Now, quick side note on this one. When I tell people this, sometimes they're like,
Oh, you're going to teach me public speaking and stuff like that. I already know how to speak. I speak on stages.
listen, we work with the highest level speakers in the world. Les Brown, Brian Tracy, just to name a few. And they implement these strategies as well because it's a different vehicle. So what we show you are all of the best practices to maximize audience retention in this specific vehicle so you can convert at an even higher level. The third thing we did was we helped Patrick create what we call an urgency-based offer. In other words, the biggest mistake that people make is they go on these podcasts and they say things like,
Go to my website. If you want to learn more, go check out my LinkedIn or go download my lead magnet.
in other words, they do not have an offer that is giving people a compelling reason to take action right now in order to get that specific offer. So what we did was we looked at Patrick's business and we created an offer that would do a few things. Number one, when people heard it, they would know that it was for them. So there was no guesswork involved. And that's where a lot of people mess up when it comes to an offer. It's so big and broad and it's for everybody that it doesn't resonate with anybody. So number one, we created an offer exclusively for podcasts that the audience literally could not find anywhere else on planet Earth. And that in and of itself creates a sense of scarcity that prompts them to do it now. But number two, when you pair it with describing exactly who it's for, now it's not only a scarce resource, but now it's a valued resource by the person that is specifically designed to attract. And then what we did, once we crafted the specific offer, is we wrapped it all in the perfect framing. In other words, it's all in how you present your offer and how you specifically leverage the power of language to present your offer in a way where it creates an insatiable amount of desire in the audience. So now Patrick had an urgency-based offer that was exclusive to the audience, that truly had scarcity built into it, and he had the specific framing and scripting to use on the podcast to deliver it in a way where he was able to communicate all of those psychological components that created an insatiable desire. Fourth thing we did with Patrick was we set up what we call pre-selling systems. And ultimately what this is all about is how do we take the attention from the podcast and turn it into a booked call as quickly as possible. Why? Because a podcast lead is the hottest they will ever be as soon as they are done listening to you on that podcast. Now, this is where most people screw it up. They'll set up some type of landing page, make them opt in, and then what ends up happening is they go to a page that says, thanks for opting in, or thanks for getting the freebie, go check your inbox. And now what they do is they just got done reading .com Secrets by Russell Brunson, and they send them into some
drip nurture email sequence.
And by the way, if you do that, listen, I'm being facetious here, but the reason why you're doing that is simply because you haven't been exposed to a higher level that converts at an extremely higher level. So with that being said, what we ultimately did with Patrick, not only did we create a way where he was able to capture that attention and get those people the offer, but the very next step in that process was book a call. But doing it in a way, leveraging once again the power of language and framing the call in a way where they did not look at it as a sales call, but they looked at it as a way to help them implement the offer that they just got access to. And what we did was we also had a method in place to be able to disqualify and qualify. Because here's the thing, Patrick can't help everybody. They need to have a certain amount of money and access to capital to be even able to afford Patrick's services. So what we did was very simple. We set up a very easy qualification process where only people that were qualified leads based off of, in Patrick's case, financial capability reached his booking calendar. The people that were disqualified never see the booking calendar. So therefore, Patrick did not spend time on calls talking to people that could not afford his services. So now ultimately, this is going to dramatically increase his close rate because he's only speaking not only to qualified prospects, but number two, to qualified prospects that have already shown an extreme level of interest in what it is that he does. Now, one of the things Patrick said in the message to me, he said, Devin, people show up and they already trust me.
People are really starting to notice me and position me as an authority. And most importantly, like show up to the calls with trust, knowledge, and knowing that we're the particular solution for their particular problem.
So now when you get a qualified person on a sales call that already spent 60 minutes with you and already trusts you and views you as the particular solution to their particular problem, it's what we call a lay down lead. Now all you gotta do is tell them how much it costs, for lack of better words, and don't screw it up in order to close the deal. But the thing I also need you to realize is we did all of this in a way where there was very clear attribution. So he knew exactly what podcasts were producing what results down to the smallest detail, because the reality is when most people go on podcasts, they have absolutely no way of tracking their data. They have no way of attributing results to any of these podcasts or the lack of results. And that's why so many people I speak to inevitably say things like, oh, podcasts just don't work, or I don't know which podcasts produce results. And it's because they didn't have specific tracking mechanisms in place to be able to tell if it truly did work or didn't work. So we're very big on that here, making sure we have very clear data tracking and attribution, all the way from how many podcasts we're getting, how big they are, average audience size, all the way to how many leads and sales came from each and every single podcast. And there's the last part of this equation. And in my opinion, it is the most important part of this equation, because here's the reality. Not everybody that listens to you on the podcast the first time is going to buy something from you. But more importantly, you have a whole other market that don't even listen to you on podcasts. And if you don't understand what we call a 7-11-4 principle that Google came out with a few years ago after doing an incredible amount of research, and don't worry, I'm going to explain why I have my phone out in a second. What that study discovered was that it takes people an average of 7 hours of consuming your content across 11 different touch points or iterations across 4 different platforms in order to buy what it is that you have on average. Of course, you're gonna have 10% of people that don't need that and they don't require all of that, and they'll buy you after just watching the podcast or just consuming a little bit of content. But for most people, they require more information because more information reduces the level of perceived risk of buying your offer in their mind. So ultimately what they're looking to answer is, who can I trust? So the reason why they're consuming 7 hours across 11 different touch points across 4 different platforms is because ultimately they're looking for who to trust. But the answer for who to trust ultimately comes down to consistency across your messaging. So now when they see a Facebook ad and then they go to Google and then they go to ChatGPT and then they go to Instagram and then they go to LinkedIn and they see consistency in Patrick's messaging across all of those different platforms, they perceive him as an authority and they perceive him as someone that they can trust and have a high level of certainty can deliver on the result that he promises. So what we helped Patrick do was create an entire content distribution system by leveraging nothing more than the podcast that he was appearing on. So the reason why I have this phone out was because I actually talked to Patrick this morning. And one of the things he sent to me in a message, he says, the podcast you got me on really made the ads convert so much better this time around. I truly believe. And also my sales team is using them for a group chat with the closer. Okay, I gave you a little insider tactic there, and I'm not going to share with you exactly what they say in that group chat. But specifically being said, what Patrick did, now his podcast became his best performing ads. Now he leverages his podcast as what we call trust assets prior to a sales call to nurture the lead, even if they came from an ad. So now we're taking the podcast, and even if somebody came from an ad, we're putting the podcast in front of them so that by the time they go to the sales call, they've already consumed 60 minutes of you on a podcast, and now they're showing up well framed. Now they're showing up with the certain beliefs that are needed in order to ultimately buy what it is that you have. So with that being said, he created an entire content distribution system that's fueling all of his organic marketing, paid marketing, and his sales process. So Patrick is making way more from these podcasts, from how he's deploying the content from these podcasts, than he did the actual shows. Don't get me wrong. He did make sales directly from the podcast, but now how he's leveraging these and using them as long-term assets are producing far greater results. When you understand the power of content distribution across your organic and paid marketing, as well as your sales process, and you implement a lot of the strategies that we teach our clients, it influences everything and it makes everything work better. So you end up making more money from the podcast based upon how you use the podcast after the podcast than when you were on the podcast. And the reason why I bring that up is because this 5-part process that we leverage with Patrick is the same exact process that we leverage with every single one of our clients. And listen, here's the thing. I'm going to be real with you. It took Patrick 4 to 5 months in order to begin to see these types of results. Why? Because we had to schedule the podcast. He had to go on the podcast, then they had to edit the podcast, throw it in the queue, and then they publish it. This isn't a short-term game. If you're somebody that's looking for something to get rich quick, this ain't for you. But if you're somebody that's really looking to scale your business, develop trust at an incredible scale, and ultimately make all of your marketing and your sales more profitable so you can experience higher margins, if you listen to what it is that we tell you how to do, because if you don't, none of that's going to happen, then this is a vehicle that you want to leverage, because it's going to be the thing that's going to allow you to build trust at scale. And trust at scale is what leads to businesses scaling faster than ever before. So with that being said, that's Patrick's results. You could get similar results if you actually put in the work, which I don't know, quite frankly, if you will, because Patrick's a very dedicated dude. And ultimately, here's the thing. I don't give a crap who you work with to get booked on podcast, or if you do it on your own. We would love to support you if so. But even if you do it on your own, please make sure you do these 5 things, because if you don't, you're not going to make a profit from the podcast you're going on. And you're inevitably going to be like one of those people I speak to that say, oh, it just didn't work out for me. And I don't want that to happen to you.